Chapter Chapter 8 is titled The Queen's Croquet Ground. And what we find here is that for the first time, Alice is coming into the main hall or the main garden, which she was aspiring to come for a long time. Right? And after coming here, there is a kind of disillusionment that is coming within her. Okay, because she was she was willing to come here for a long time, but she was going other way round. But when she comes over here, she sees this world is completely different as the other places are. And what we find here is that this place is ruled by the cards. Okay, so Alice enters the garden and meets the three gardeners, and all of them are in the shape of playing cards. Okay, and what they are doing? They are painting white roses red. So the garden has white roses and they are painting them red. Okay, upon noticing Alice, the gardeners explains that they have planted white rose trees by mistake and must paint them red before the Queen of Hearts finds that out. Okay, so what I find here is that there is a kind of autocracy that is prevalent in this system. Okay, because they are always afraid, the gardeners are afraid of the queen, right? And this gives us a hint of what kind of person the queen might be. Okay, so what we find here is that when Alice finally finds her way into the Wonderland's beautiful garden and also the croquet ground, as the title suggests, she discovers a white rose tree being painted red by the gardeners, and they are in the form of animated and quarrelsome cards. Okay, and what we see over here, Alice does find something odd or oddly familiar about this garden and this surreal scene about that is present over here. So as I have told you before, and time and again I have told you, that everything that is happening, or every character that is happening, or most important thing that is happening in this Wonderland has a representative or a real life counterpart. Okay, so here this garden where this tree is present, or the croquet ground to say, this garden is actually the garden of Alice, or Alice's own family garden, where croquet parties were held, because his father was the dean, he was in charge of the Christ Church. And also what we find here is that this deanery garden was the site of many elaborate parties. Okay, and Alice Liddell's parents, that is the Dean and Mrs. Liddell, held for all levels of British high society. Okay, they arranged they arranged parties for several people, and that is why it appears to be familiar. It was also while gazing through the window in the college library that Lewis Carroll first caught sight of Alice and her sisters on the croquet lawn in the real life. Okay, so what we find here is that this Queen's Croquet Ground is a representative of the ground of Dean Liddell's own garden. Okay, and if we see on the mythological level, this Wonderland's beautiful garden is a garden of Elysium. Okay, Elysium, which is the most desirable realm in ancient Greek afterlife. Okay, so in several um, description you have seen the mention of Elysium. It is ruled by the underworld king and queen. Here uh, we found the souls of the here we get to see the souls of the heroes and heroines who, according to Homer and Pindar also, could have observed engaged in games in the blissful meadows of asphodel lilies. Okay, Pindar gives us a fuller description of this place, and I quote Pindar by saying that in Elysium, he writes, in Elysium, where fields of pain, liliaceous asphodel, and poplars grew, there stood the gates that led to the house of Hades. Okay, in Virgil's Aeneid, you have heard the name of Aeneid. We have seen the description of Elysium, where the description goes like this, that Elysium enjoys perpetual springtime. Okay, and in these places, they are the soldiers, they are the fighters, rest forever, do not fight among themselves, rather they are in such a way that they are playing in those meadows. Clear? So after coming over here, coming to this place in this Wonderland garden, the denizens are like those of the Garden of Elysium. Okay, because they are also involved in playing games. Okay, in this case a peculiar card game and very odd form of croquet. Wonderland's Elysium is the Queen's croquet ground, while Alice watches the arrival of the royal procession of soldiers, courtiers, royal children or royal guests, and the king and the queen of the Wonderland themselves. There are also processions of this sort in Eleusinian mysteries. Okay, so as the Wonderland procession passes by, Alice wonders, and I quote, whether she ought not to lie down on her face like the three gardeners. Why is it so? Because a real Alice would realize the dilemma of a child attempting to determine appropriate rules of etiquette for such a procession. Okay, it was important for her to learn how to determine the rank and of those arriving in the deanery garden, so she could address them in an appropriate manner. Okay, so as in real life, she was in a fix how to deal with things, how to treat people nicely, how to behave with the important people who were coming into her house, into a garden. Similarly, same feeling is being projected in Alice in this Wonderland. Okay, so as I was saying, this notice seeing of the queen. The queen is the queen of hearts. The queen arrives and she is surrounded by a great entourage of soldiers who are also playing cards. Okay, যে তারা কি কুইন যখন আসছে তারা হচ্ছে প্লেয়িং কার্ডসের। আবার আরেকটা জিনিস যেটা হচ্ছে, যারা তার ফলোয়ার্স বা তার যারা সোলজার্স তারাও কিন্তু প্লেয়িং কার্ডসের তাদের হচ্ছে বডিগুলো। এখানটা একটা অদ্ভুত জিনিস যেটা হচ্ছে সেটা হচ্ছে কি, দ্য হায়ারার্কিক্যাল অর্ডার ইজ টার্নড কমপ্লিটলি টপসি টার্ভি। একটা হায়ারার্কিক্যাল অর্ডারে কি হয় যে মানুষ সব থেকে পাওয়ারফুল, তারপর অ্যানিমালস, তারপর হচ্ছে যে কোনো ইনঅ্যানিমেট অবজেক্ট, রাইট? কখনোই তো তোর একটা ইনঅ্যানিমেট অবজেক্ট যেটা হচ্ছে ফোন বা হচ্ছে তোর দরজা বা যে কোনো হচ্ছে এই যে এখানটার কেসে হচ্ছে প্লেয়িং কার্ডস, কখনো কি সেগুলো ইম্পর্ট্যান্ট হয়ে দাঁড়াতে পারে, মোস্ট পাওয়ারফুল হতে পারে? অ্যাকচুয়ালি নো। মানুষ সব থেকে বেশি ইম্পর্ট্যান্ট রিয়েল লাইফে, বাট ইন দিস ওয়ার্ল্ড, ইন দিস ওয়ান্ডারল্যান্ড, দ্য রোল ইজ reversed. Here, the playing cards, the inanimate things, are becoming the kings and queens. Okay, and next to them in power is the animals, or they are the animals who are in power. Clear? Similarly, next to the animals important in power is Alice. So the human being is least powerful or of least importance, and the most important thing is that of these cards. Clear? So the gardeners scramble to their bellies to bow before the queen, who asks for Alice's name with great severity. Alice answers the queen graciously and realizes she should not be afraid, as they are simply pack of cards. Okay. The queen asks Alice about the trembling gardeners. Alice responds flippantly, prompting the queen to call for Alice's beheading until the king calms her down. So, another thing that we find over here is that this queen is very much outrageous. প্রচণ্ড পরিমাণে রাগী। সে কি বলে? সে কথায় কথায় বলে অফ উইথ হার হেড। ঠিক আছে, যাকেই বলবে তাকেই অফ উইথ হার হেড। যে তার রাগে মানে তার কি বলবো, তার মতের বিরুদ্ধে যায়, তাকেই বলে অফ উইথ হার হেড, মানে তার গলা কেটে ফেলো, তার মুন্ডু কেটে ফেলো। So upon discovering what the gardeners were doing, she orders the same. Okay, but Alice saves the gardeners by hiding them in a flower pot and going off with the queen to play the croquet when she arrives at the croquet match. Alice finds out from the white rabbit that the duchess is under sentence of execution for boxing the queen's ears. Okay. Also, what we find, Alice has a difficult time in adjusting to the curious version of this croquet played by the queen. Okay, the croquet ground is rigid. The croquet balls are actually alive hedgehogs. Okay, and the mallets, the sticks through which those balls are hit, are actually flamingo birds. Okay, so completely opposite. এখানটা ইনঅ্যানিমেট অবজেক্টরা বেশি পাওয়ারফুল হয়ে যাচ্ছে, বা অ্যানিমালসদেরকে হচ্ছে ওই ইনঅ্যানিমেট অবজেক্টের জায়গায় ইউজ করা হচ্ছে। আমরা কি করি, একটা বল থাকে ক্রকেট ম্যাচে, একটা ছোট্ট একটা গোল মতো থাকে মাঠের মধ্যে, সেখানটা একটা ডান্ডা ব্যাট মতো বা হকি স্টিকের মতো বলতে পারিস, সেইটা দিয়ে কি করা হয়, ওই গোল বলটাকে হচ্ছে মারা হয়। দুটোই ইনঅ্যানিমেট, রাইট? এবার এইখানটায় কি, এখানটা একটা হেজ হগ রয়েছে, সেই হেজ হগটাকে বল হিসেবে ট্রিট করা হয়েছে, আর ফ্ল্যামিঙ্গো যেটা একটা বার্ড, তাকে হচ্ছে ওই ব্যাটটা বা ওই হকি স্টিকটা বা ওই স্টিকের কাজ করা হচ্ছে, সেটা দিয়ে মারা হচ্ছে। ক্লিয়ার? সো দ্য ভেরিয়াস প্লেয়িং কার্ড স্ট্যান্ড অন all fours to form the arches that the balls are hit through, মানে যেটার মধ্যে দিয়ে হচ্ছে যাবে বলটা, তাহলেই হচ্ছে স্কোর ধরা হবে, সেইটাই হচ্ছে প্লেয়িং কার্ডসরা হচ্ছে ফর্ম করছে। অ্যাজ she plays the queen, apoplectically shouts for everyone's decapitation. Decapitation মানে মুন্ডু কেটে ফেলা। So what we find here is that Alice attempts to slip away from the croquet match, but catches sight of the Cheshire Cat's grin. Okay, but here the Cheshire Cat is not in full form, but only the head. Okay, the Cheshire Cat asks her how she is getting on with all the situation, and Alice begins to complain about the queen's unusual behavior and everything. But the king notices the conversation and attempts to bully the Cheshire cat, but it refuses to give the king's uh, and the king's taunts. And what we find here is that the king becomes aggravated and calls for the queen to remove the Cheshire cat. And to this, what we find, the queen carelessly orders the decapitation of the Cheshire cat. But the amusing thing is that the Cheshire cat is only a head now. It does not have a body. So how will it be decapitated? মানে তার মুন্ডু ছেদ করা হবে কি করে, মানে তার মাথা কাটা হবে কি করে? অফ উইথ আর হেড যেটা বলছে, সে তার মুন্ডুটাই তো রয়েছে, তাহলে সেটা কাটা হবে কি করে? So the executioner and the king cannot agree on how to execute a Cheshire cat, who at this point is only a head which is floating in mid-air. Clear? So they appeal to Alice, who suggests that they get the advice of the Duchess, who actually owns this Cheshire cat. But by the time the Duchess arrives, the Cheshire cat has completely vanished. So what we find here is that Alice's deep desire. This is more or less the story of this chapter. But what we find here is that she always hoped to reach the garden. Okay, her wishes are fulfilled, but her experience that she gets in this garden proves to be a frustrating one. Okay, as has been in the different parts of Wonderland. Okay, so what we find here is that this description of the frustration of Alice is being shown over here. And this garden occupies a central role, not only in Alice's quest but also in Wonderland. Why? The garden is the seat of power for the king and the queen of hearts, and the use of the card to suit of hearts underscores the idea that the garden is the heart of Wonderland. Why so? Because Alice discovers that the garden provides no great experience of enlightenment or everything. Rather, what we find, or what the readers see, and also Alice sees, she sees that the rules and the practices of the garden are just idiosyncratic and maddening as the rest of the other places that she has visited. Right? The beds of the bright flowers she pined are nothing more than ridges and furrows and everything. The roses that are present are only painted rather than natural beauty. Clear? The garden is not an ideal place of calm pastoral beauty, but it is an artificially constructed space. Okay, it becomes a place of anxiety and fear also for Alice, because there is always orders of decapitation, off with her head, or off with his head, right, or off with its head. So what we find here is that Alice is actually getting accustomed with the unusual social hierarchy that I was saying that is present in this Wonderland. But what we find here is that the discovery of an inanimate object which is actually ruling this existence, whole Wonderland, shakes Alice's fragile understanding of her surroundings. Till this very point, she was accustomed with the idea of animals talking and taking the upper hand, but here what we find, she is really surprised what is happening. Okay, before her arrival in the garden, Alice expected an inverted hierarchy where the animals have a measure of authority and they had treated her as an inferior. Right? Alice was accustomed to it. But now what we find, Alice has become accustomed with all the orders that were given to her by the white rabbit, the Cheshire cat, the caterpillar. But what we find here is that she discovers um, in this garden that all these animals are actually subjects of an inanimate object, a queen who is actually a playing card. তাহলে দেখছিস কতটা লেভেলে হচ্ছে সাবভার্সন হয়েছে, কতটা লেভেলে হচ্ছে উল্টে গেছে বা ইনভার্টেড হয়েছে. Okay, see the level of inversion that is presented over here. Okay, in Alice's world, inanimate objects that are registers themselves below the animals. Okay, in the social hierarchy they are registered below the what can you say, animals, right, as I told you before also. But here what we find, the animals are under the inanimate objects. Okay, the queen acts not only as a ruler but also as a ruthless what can you say, authoritarian. Okay, where she has always a sense of penchant of ordering her subjects of beheadings. Okay, উহার মুন্ডু কাটিয়া লাও, ঠিক আছে, উহার ল্যাজ কাটিয়া লাও না শ্রীকান্তের মতো, বা উহার মুন্ডু কাটিয়া লাও. So what we find here is that she utilizes the living creatures as actual objects, playing croquet using hedgehogs, flamingos, and her playing card subjects are equipments. So Wonderland completely reverses the convention of the ground, of the world that is above the ground, so that the inanimate objects rule the land and using living creatures as tools. Okay, this is the difference. Also what we see, Alice starts to realize that she may have more power in the Wonderland than she realized. Okay, once she figures out that the queen and her procession are merely a pack of cards, she demonstrates a previously unseen courage. She talks to the queen with great insolence, attacking the illusion of Wonderland's power. Though she stands up for herself, she does not yet attempt to assert control over the queen. Okay, so what we find here is that she has found out her own identity. The identity that she was lacking, the identity that she was questioning, who she was, what she was. Okay, she is gaining that, or she has gained that. Clear? However, the fact that the gardeners, the kings, and the executioners have deferred to Alice and asked her for help in mediating conflict against, it actually indicates that they believe that she has some authority. Okay, আগে তো তাকে পাত্তাই দেওয়া হচ্ছিল না. Before this, she was not even considered for anything. But now, when her help is being asked, what we see, what we understand that there is some kind of authority to her. Ultimately, what we find, Alice only has to wake up to destroy the Wonderland dream, right, of all the inhabitants. But she remains uneasy as she plays the croquet and everything. Clear? So, what we see over here is that this description is important in understanding, in describing what is happening, and also what we see here is that this land about the Wonderland is actually a complete opposite to the real life world. Okay, so Wonderland would certainly remind Alice Liddell of Queen Victoria's visit to Christchurch in 1860. Okay, and the reception was held on the evening uh, of a stay at Deanery, that is the garden of the Dean Liddell, and high-ranking people were also present there. So what we find here is that Alice Liddell's parents were closest thing to the royalty because of the academia had to offer. So in this Wonderland, the King and the Queen of Hearts are actually Alice's parents. Okay, as I said you before that they have real life counterparts. So the King and Queen of Hearts in Wonderland are actually the King and Queen of Hearts are Alice's parents. Okay, Henry George Liddell and Lorena Hannah Liddell. Okay, why? Because Henry Liddell, that is Alice's father, the dean, um, he was the dean of Christ Church and also the chief administrator of Oxford University. So you can understand what his position is, right? It was authentic. He was an authentic aristocrat. Okay, and he has this power of. He has been the confidant of 3 prime ministers. Okay, Palmerston, Gladstone, and Disraeli. And what we find here is that all the people who would enter the garden or meet the Queen, that is the Queen Victoria, they would need the permission of Mrs. Liddell. Okay, like the King of Hearts, Liddell was generally seen as a well-mannered or well-meaning person, like many academics. Somewhat what we find that there is this vague and careless administrator is found in him. In this what we find, the dean was certainly comparable to the vague and indecisive King of Hearts, okay, in Wonderland, who demonstrate a similar cavalier disregard for legal procedures as he flip-flops on court rulings. Okay, where he says, and I quote, important, unimportant, unimportant, important. So he is not fixed. He cannot fix his opinion on any one point. Clear? And if we see on the mythological level, the King of Hearts, that is Dean Liddell, both assume the mantle of Hades or Hades, the king of the underworld. Okay, so because he was very rich, his subterranean world was also the source of minerals and gemstones. And what we find here is that this wealth derived from the Greek word wealth, and from the Romans came to know him as Pluto. Okay, so I am not going into such detailed description over here because you do not need this for your exam purpose, but this is this description. And on the mythological level, as I have said about Hades, so Hades' queen is most commonly portrayed as a goddess Persephone, Persephone. Okay, Persephone is a queen of the underworld, but there is this distinction, there is this dichotomy over here, is that the character of Queen of Hearts is conveyed on the mythological level by another more archaic goddess, okay, who precede Persephone. Okay, 20 years after the writing of the fairy tale, Lewis Carroll himself provided his readers with specific clue of the mythological origin of the Queen of Hearts, and it is the Furies. Okay, so the Queen of Hearts on the mythological level is the Furies, or the Greek, or in the Greek to say the Erinys, Erinyes. Okay, so what we find here is that Carol's biographer, Donald Thomas, names the prototype of the Wonderland's Queen of Hearts as Tisiphone, Tisiphone, the Queen of Furies. Okay, let's just not get into all those things because it will go all and all long process it was. So Tisiphone the Fury would certainly be the excellent model for temperamentally, for the heartless and the vengeful Queen of Hearts, and that is what is being described over here. And what we find here is that Tisiphone's actual meaning, the word's actual meaning is voice of revenge. Okay, and this actually fits with the Queen of Hearts shrieking when she cries out, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head," and all this. So what we find here is that on the mythological level it is Tisiphone. Okay, so in the real life, Alice's mother, Lorena Hannah Liddell, was the real life Queen of Hearts because she was beautiful. She was very beautiful when she was young, and without her permission, no one would be able to have access or to be able to visit the Prime Minister or the Archbishop or anyone who is at power. Okay, so certainly Lewis Carroll was not the first to observe how Mrs. Liddell often held the court at Deanery. There was several compositions of poems regarding her. What we find here is that this power structure is being presented to whom? To Alice. And this image is being presented of whom? Of her parents only. So he is critiquing her parents in another form. And also what we find here is that the game that is being played, the Queen's Croquet ground, is of course croquet, obviously. And it is found out that the leaders installed one of the Oxford's first croquet ground on the Deanery lawn in 1856. Okay, croquet became known as the Queen of Games in all of England. In several parts it was played. Annual championships were also held. But what I find here is that this description is actually to satirize the power that was concentrated only in the hands of a selected few. Okay, in Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts arbitrarily invites and dismisses whomsoever she wishes. Okay, so when she discovers the uninvited Duchess playing croquet with Alice, she immediately kicks her out of the garden. Okay, this hints at the fact that the Oxford Duchess, the Bishop of Oxford, was welcome at the Deanery only on invitation of the Liddells. Okay, because Christchurch was the only college in England in which both the college and the cathedral were under the authority of the dean. Okay, but as a conservative opponent of the dean, the bishop Samuel Wilberforce was tolerated only on special occasions. And just as the Queen of Hearts banished the Duchess at will, Mrs. Liddell could on a whim decide to banish Wilberforce from her croquet ground parties. Clear? So, when we see the picture of this Cheshire cat, okay, a rather different scenario is presented here. Okay, itself with the disturbing appearance of this floating head of the Cheshire cat. So the question comes who this Cheshire cat is. Neither the king's nor the queen's commands to have the head removed are met with success. Right? The Oxford Cheshire cat was as I told you in the previous class only, it is Reverend Edward Bowyer Pusey, okay, who was a Christchurch canon, could not be removed as a college head by the dean. And what we find here is that Carroll viewed this, and other conservatives also viewed him as the spiritual guardian of the college. Okay, they considered Edward Pusey as the guardian of this college, and they felt that Pusey kept an watchful eye over the deanery, just like the Cheshire Cat watched over the Queen's Garden. Okay, so the floating cat's head is also suggestive of the haunting spirit of the founder of Christchurch, who is the 15th century Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who, like the cat, was also threatened with beheading, okay, in his time. It is Wolsey's cardinal's hat with his broad brim and long tassel that surmounts the cat's head on Christchurch coats of arms. So what we find here is that Carroll humorously conjured up the ghost of college founders and everything in all these things. What we find here is that Carroll had this vision of Wolsey's spirit arise to protest the attack of the dean's uninspired design for Christchurch newly erected belfry. What we find here is that Carroll is, from every instance, from every point of view, trying to satirize, trying to project the power that is being exerted by Mr. Liddell. He is satirizing that through a narrative which is nonsensical. Okay, understood? So this is a power structure which is being presented humorously, and you might think that on force reading you might think that these are not important, but actually these are of so much significant placing of facts, placing of his own life instances through these stories. Okay.